Thank you for all coming today. Looking forward to this. We actually have two things going on. We have a little bonus program for about 10 minutes before we get to the fife and drum. One of our East Granby students contacted me recently. He said he was completing his capstone project for school and wondered, since it's of a historical nature, if he could present it at one of our Historical Society programs. So, of course, I said yes, and what it is, he can explain it more, but it'll just be about 10 minutes. It has to do with the National Archives Citizen Archivist Project, and it's tied to our nation's 250th anniversary coming up in 2 years, a year and a half. And it has to do with the effort on their part to transcribe Revolutionary War veteran pension documents and how citizens can actually become part of this project. So I will turn it over to Robert Ravens-Seger for his presentation first.
Can everyone hear me?
There's no microphone, so he's going to have to speak up.
Okay. I'm going to tell you why you should become a citizen archivist for the National Archives. Okay. In 2 years will be the United States semi-quincentennial, which is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. These kind of events are considered times to reflect on the history of our nation, and the best way to do that is to become a citizen archivist. Now, the Citizen Archives program was initiated by the National Archives and the National Park Service. It's volunteering to transcribe, tag, and comment on virtual primary source documents. This makes these documents more accessible and readable by putting them in a digitized font. These the kind of things that you can transcribe are military pension records, which I'll be talking about today, correspondence, propaganda posters, and photographs. Now, citizen archivists have transcribed thousands of pages of these documents already, and there are more than a dozen missions that are active, and even more than that have been completed already. Here's an example of one of these documents. As you can see, it is handwritten, and this project helps make this digital. So the Revolutionary War Pension File Transcription Project is the mission I'm here to talk about. It contains original pension files submitted by veterans of the American War of Independence and their widows. Here's an example of one. They described their service and at the time were used to apply for federal pensions. Over 80,000 veterans and their widows did this. And the National Park Service is interested in this because it increases their understanding of battlefields and historical sites and events. And by doing this, you can discover history in the form of these primary sources. So how to do it? First, you take this link to set up an account for the National Archives. The username must begin with NPS for National Park Service. Here's an example. You search for a veteran's name or a town they lived in. You select a case file. You select transcription, then select edit transcription, then type it into the field on the right. And if a word or group of words is unreadable, just transcribe it as illegible, and then when you're done, select submit. Here's what that looks like. Here's the transcription button that you press, and here's the field that you type in. You can use this thing right here to go from document to document, scrolling down and clicking on different things. Or you can put a document number in here and press these buttons. Now, some veterans of the Revolution that lived in East Granby are these people. I was able to snap a photo of this map, which was in the East Granby Library Historical Room, provided by Gary Tracy. It contains maps of every cemetery in East Granby and the names of the veterans that are buried there. The ones with detailed records are Andrew Hillier, Richard Gay, and David Enos, and some names that didn't really have anything in the National Archives, but you might recognize are Phelps, Clark, Bates, Ball, and Holcomb. Now, Andrew Hillier, in particular, is very well known because he has a well-documented military career. There are 66 pages of records in his pension file in the National Archives website, and I, along with other citizen archivists, have transcribed all of these pages over the past couple of months. Some basic information about him that was gleaned from these documents. He was born in 1743 and died in 1828, although there is a death date discrepancy that exists. He graduated New Haven College in 1770, in other words, Yale. He had 2 wives in his life, Elizabeth Gay and Lucy Tudor, and he had 8 children in total. Here's a photo I took of his 2 headstones in the East Granby Center Cemetery. Here's the original one, and here's another one that was put up later. As you can see, here's the death date discrepancy. This one says 1828, this one says 1826, and here's his wife's gravestone. Now, according to the book called East Granby, The Evolution of a Connecticut Town by Mary Jane Springman and Benny Fennell Guinan, written in 1983, he lived south of 19 North Main Street near Creamery Brook. This is where his house would have been at the time. Here's some information on his military service. It started in 1760 when he joined the British Army, and during the 7 Years' War, he was involved in the capture of Havana in 1762. During the Revolution, he joined the Patriot cause, and he first responded to the Lexington Alarm in 1775. He was an ensign of the 2nd Company of the 6th Connecticut Battalion of the Continental Army. He served as a lieutenant and then a captain of a troop of the 5th Connecticut Regiment of Light Cavalry for 2 years, and then dragoons for 17 months, during which he had a salary of 98 pounds. It was said that he was well liked by his troops, and at one point he and his regiment recovered $20,000 worth of stolen Patriot property stolen by a loyalist spy / serial burglar who was only known as Barrymore. And right after that, after devising a strategy at the Battle of Horseneck, which is in modern Greenwich, he was gifted an ornate Jaeger rifle. This is what he was credited with saying at that battle, right before attacking the British cavalry, which extremely outnumbered him, and they won. And the highest rank he obtained was colonel. So, I have just done Andrew Hillier. I have also transcribed the pension records of Old Newgate prison guards, Alexander Gowdy and Levi Clark, who guarded it when it was used as a prison during the Revolution. And I also keyed in my grandfather's handwritten transcription that was written in the 1980s, which was a pension record of my 6th great-grandfather, Joseph Seger of Simsbury, who also fought in the Continental Army. So, you should become a citizen archivist. You can pick up a reminder card at the refreshment table, which has the URL for the website. And I'd like to thank the East Granby Historical Society for providing me this venue.
Are there any questions for Robert? James Martin Clark has written a book called Connecticut's Fife and Drum Tradition, and I hear that he is like the cream of the cream when it comes to fife, well, the drum, mostly. He's mostly a drummer. He does teach music students, and he has a few members of the Connecticut Valley Field music group, and they perform lots of times: Memorial Day, Independence Day, Veterans Day, celebrations, other civic events, and some of their members, including Jim, act as musical instructors for the Marquis of Granby Fife and Drum Corps, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with. Jim just received a Lifetime Achievement Award, and Jen is going to have to help me out with what it's called.
Oh, the United States Association of Rudimental Drummers, I forget which. But
So he was recently down in Washington receiving this Lifetime Achievement Award, so we are looking forward to it. There you go.
We're going to play some tunes for you, and also I'm going to talk about, try to give you a kind of social context for the fife and drum tradition here in New England. The good news is that playing this kind of music together is a lot of fun, so that's good, right? Produce a certain amount of levity. The bad news is that I'm a very serious person and it can be very boring. So the balance, we'll have to control how that balance works out. So if you all stand up and leave, that will send a strong message to me, and I'll try to compensate. But I make no guarantees, I'll do the best I can. The first drum that we know about, this kind of drum, that came here, came in 1620 on the Mayflower. There are a couple of points about that I think are interesting. As I said, I'm a very boring person, so you may not find this so, but I'm trying. Yes. It was only a couple of generations before that that this kind of drumming for military purposes came to England. The great Queen, Elizabeth I, brought some drummers from Switzerland to England in the 1560s, early in her reign. And at that time, having infantry be a major part of a military operation was new during the High Renaissance. Before that, it was largely peasants with sticks and forks and so forth, and mounted cavalry being the aristocratic knights. But massed infantry became an effective use of personnel during the Renaissance, and that's how the drumming gets connected to it, because if you have a bunch of infantry, you need to get them to move at the same time, march in step, move as one big unit. And that's where the drums come from, their original use. And the oldest drum that we have of this sort that's still extant is in the Historical Instruments Museum in Basel, Switzerland. And that drum is they all call it the 1571 drum. That's when they think that drum was made. There's pretty good documentation for that. So this drum here is a replica. For art lovers, you may know one of the most famous paintings that Rembrandt van Rijn, the famous Dutch painter, did in the middle 1600s was, it's often called the Night Watch, is a longer name for giving the title of the captain who ordered it. In Amsterdam, the Night Watch was just what it sounds like. There was no police force. There were no police forces in these days. But a lot of rather important people in the town would sponsor a night watch. You don't have these big early capitalists patrolling the streets at midnight, but you have them paying the people who do. And this was a kind of, they're proud of their civic station. And so they had Rembrandt paint a picture of themselves sort of acting like they were the actual night watch. And in that painting, there's a picture of a drum just like this. It's the most famous painting of somebody playing a great big drum, and the drum is so big, you really have to work to get around it. Drum design is something that's changed a lot. You really don't get a bigger, louder drum by having one so big, but I think at that time they thought you did. Most of the drums were made by barrel makers, by coopers. So I guess they were used to however many quarts you could put in one. We're going to play you the first little piece that is from an English book. The book is called Playford's Dancing Master. John Playford collected several dozen tunes. And these are folk tunes, or nearly folk tunes, from the middle of the 1600s. And this was a big problem at the time, because when Puritans are particularly powerful in English culture in different parts of England. They forbade, among other things, dancing. Also the fife. We play a tune all the time in modern fife and drum music, the tune named the Devil's Flute. That was the name the Puritans gave to the fife, because it's so loud and shrill and just generally disreputable. That another name for the fife is Devil's Flute. This tune is a nice dance tune from the middle 1600s, and first we'll play it for you, and then I want to show you something about it, because I like to show you technical things about music, because I'm a boring person. Here we go. People often ask how this how you play, why people use this kind of stick grip, you know, because most drum set players today will play something along these lines. But you don't for this, and drums this big are the answer. To put this drum around you and to hold it in place, the drum ends up at a really big angle. You can't walk with it flat in front of you. It just does not work at all. So the drum's at a big angle. So if I were to hold the sticks this way, you see I hit the rim a lot, but if I turn my hand over, there I go. So at least now you stand a chance of not hitting the rim too often. So that's where the stick grip comes from. So this is a mid-1600s tune called Strawberries and Cream. Show you something about how that tune works. You might notice that the notes in the melody, people will often say, that sounds ancient, that sounds from a different time period, and there are technical reasons for that. I was a drummer until I was only a drummer until I was about 19. I didn't know anything, I didn't play a melody instrument or anything, and I love music and I wanted to know about this stuff, so I had to learn all this stuff as an adult. And that was one of the things that interested me. You could hear music from different time periods or different styles, and you could, no, that sounds different. You know, Mozart doesn't sound like Schumann, but I had no idea why. So I spent a long time studying that, and I'm going to inflict a little bit of that knowledge on you now. Caitlin, one of our fifers, is going to show you what the G major scale on this fife sounds like. We all know what a major scale sounds like, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, but she's going to remind you of it. Pick an octave and just...
To the regular scale?
Yep. But in Renaissance times, that major scale which is so normal sounding to us, was almost never used. Very, very rare that you can find a piece from the 1400s or 1500s that uses that scale. The use of the scale is that those are generally the notes that you pick among to make up your melody, the notes that are somewhere in that scale. The more ancient scales that we call modes in music theory land are used in this piece that we just played for you. So Caitlin will play you this mode, and you'll hear how some of the notes just don't sound like what you would expect for the next part of the scale. Especially that one.
I'm going to play a different octave.
Yes. F natural. Thank you.
That was harder than I thought. I could just make it all up.
And that's helpful because, you see, it doesn't sound like you don't say, oh, run up and down a scale. What she just played isn't what you would expect. But in medieval and Renaissance music, these scales that to us sound so strange were absolutely normal. And what you, as I said, what you almost never find is a major scale. There are interesting musical reasons for that, which we will not go into, mercifully. The next thing was to play one afternoon, so I'm trying to not tell you as much as I would like to tell you about each detail. So that kind of music was contemporaneous with the earliest drums here. And as I said, they first arrived in 1620 on the Mayflower, and Miles Standish, the famous militia leader, not one of the Pilgrims, but an employee to provide what do they call it? Security. He was the security guy. He had the hat and everything, and went to the concerts and made sure that nobody jumped on the stage. He ran security. He would have his militia people with the muskets come in on Sunday mornings and Wednesday afternoons to the church meeting, and they would be guided in by the drum. And the drum in all early New England history, early New England 17th century, for quite a while, was used as the signal instrument. If you think about it, there were no brass foundries in New England in the 1600s. There are hardly any farms, you know? And so nobody made bells. And when you see the size, if you've been to Plymouth and seen the Mayflower II, the ship up there, I think that's really fascinating. You can see how tiny that ship looks. And they had to bring more essential things than church bells over from England. And so they could fit a drum. If you take the hedge off, you can fit a lot of food inside a drum, especially on the side. So it doesn't take much storage space. So all through the 17th century, you could also make them here, as they did. These drums were used where we would use church bells. You know, if you have a fire alarm, you ring the church bells. You just play the drum. When you have a town meeting, you ring the bell to let everyone, because the wristwatches, of course, don't exist. Pocket watches are extremely expensive and very rare. Mostly you're told what time it is by looking at the sun. On a day like this, everybody's late for their meetings. The drummer would march through the town. And when I was doing research for that book that was mentioned, I found some references to the town drummer in Wallingford, for instance, who was paid a pretty good salary just to be the announcer of church services and town meetings, public functions. So, throughout colonial times, this kind of music with fifes and drums was gradually played, gradually becoming an increasing part of the community. And every town was supposed to have a militia. Every town was supposed to have a militia company. And in each militia company, you were supposed to have a fifer and a drummer. And this continued just about until the Civil War. You would only meet 2 or 3 times a year. You'd have what we call militia days or muster days, which is what we still call our big fife and drum events. We call them musters. And on the muster day, able-bodied men were supposed to have a musket and a certain amount of ammunition, and they would show up at the town green and get checked out, make sure they have what they need, and they would study a little marching, they'd have a big party, there would be a great deal of inebriation going on, it's an incentive for people to show And that's how the militias work. And so in every town, theoretically in all of New England, but particularly in southern New England, there would be a drummer and a fifer in every town. And oftentimes they can make little groups of people to play. Now, the next thing we're going to play for you is from the time of the American Revolution, essentially. And it's a troop step. When you get larger military formations, and this during the Revolutionary War, this is the first time it comes up really in the United States, what becomes the United States. Picture this, you have most of your soldiers coming from the countryside. They are mostly illiterate, and mostly they're not volunteers. Nothing better is turning up, and so you're stuck being in the Army for a while. In the British Army, they were often just pressed into service with very, think of Barry Lyndon. You just have no choice about it. And there are people from rural areas. Now you're in the Army. What do you do next? Whatever the sergeant tells you to do. So it's very important that you knew where your regiment was during a battle. And you would have a regimental flag. And every soldier, one of the few ways they could organize themselves is to organize around their regimental flag. Sometimes different regiments would have slightly different decorations on their uniforms so they could identify themselves. Because in the heat of battle, it's easy to get lost. So a very important ceremony on a regular basis was to have these troopings of the colors. And what happens then is each regiment would line up, in the British they line up just 3 soldiers deep, and very slowly across the front of the regiment you would march, holding the regimental flag hanging down so you could see the whole thing. And every regimental flag, obviously, is unique and has slightly different colors and different shapes on it. And that soldier's job, the soldier generally couldn't read, so he would recognize where he was supposed to go by recognizing his regimental flag. So you definitely don't want to have your trooping of the colors to go by too rapidly. You need a very slow tempo for this to work. You just march up and down. Many times a month, you'd march up and down holding out the regimental flag. And that's what this piece is for. It's a trooping piece. And you'll tell the tempo is very slow. And that was its purpose, to be on display in front of the soldiers so they can get to recognize their flag. This is called the Duke of York's favorite troop. We hope it is. 1, 2, I have something that I think of. Oh dear, it got lost. He said, please. Sorry, that's Antoinette. She's my favorite. I'm going to play this drum for this. This is very special. And maybe some of you would like to take a peek at it afterwards. This is an original Connecticut militia drum made in Bloomfield. The Brown family were coopers and made barrels, and they also made drums, very famously. So among percussion addicts, the most famous early American drums are these Brown drums. And the most famous of the Brown family making drums was a fellow named Eli Brown. And as the tag inside tells us, this drum was made in Bloomfield in 1825. So it's just coming up on its 200th birthday. I hope to have a special celebration for it, play it a lot next summer. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of maple. And not to bore you with all the details, but this drum would be made out of a single, you cut from a big tree, you cut one slice of wood, and then you steam it, and you can bend, you've heard of steam bending, and that's how you would make that work. It's just one piece of wood. I mean, there's no multiple plies. So the problem is there's lots of wastage, because you get one little crack in the piece of wood, and you have to throw it out and start over. With multiple plies, most modern drums have multiple plies, and there are all sorts of little cracks, and you've got 6 plies, and there's a little sliver somewhere. It doesn't matter. But in this kind of drum, it really does matter. And you can hear it resonate just, there's a lot of sound to come just from touching it. So it's one thin piece of wood, and these, we call these the tacks, and this is a tack design. And as this comes around and makes its seam, which is right here, it's beautiful, beautifully maintained 200 years later. All down the side here, there's a line of tacks, and that reinforces the glue that's holding it together. You hold it in the shape that it's bent into, and it dries out and holds that shape, and you glue it, and then they put a line of tacks down the side. The tacks on this drum are purely decorative. This is a reproduction drum. This one's brand new. It's only about 25 years old. But all the old drums would have one line of tacks, and then for decorative purposes, they would just keep decorating. The other tacks don't do anything, but they look pretty, and I like that. I like it pretty. So I had this drum many years ago, and it just came back into my possession, which is a long story. And I'm going to play it for you. We're going to play a march. I have drumsticks.
On the podium.
Ha! I would have figured that out sooner or later. I think we might muffle it a little bit. These drums, oh dear. Where's my cousin when I need him? See, that rings a lot. And you see, and for playing it inside, I know that's not the most attractive sound, but these were drums that would be played for the militia companies. Oftentimes just one drummer, sometimes a small group, maybe 4 or 6 drummers would be a lot most of the time. And you might be marching 150 guys across this field or across the village green, or sometimes in more serious military situations. So the idea of the drum to be played outside, they resonate a lot from a distance. A lot of the ringing goes away, and you just hear the beats that come out. But when you play it inside, it's pretty loud and pretty ringy. So I'll tone it down a little bit. But this is the kind of drum. This is exactly one of the drums that was played in early New England for the militias. Let's see if my wallet will make it more. This will be right here. See, it makes a big difference. So this is a famous tune from the 17th century originally, called The Girl I Left Behind Me. So, here we go. 1, 2. round about the tempo that soldiers would be marching at in the 18th century, maybe in the early 19th century. Oftentimes, supply trains were not that copious and not that comprehensive. I'm about to sneeze in a loud and embarrassing way right here in front of everyone. So listen closely, you'll enjoy this. I'm trying. So the soldiers carried really heavy packs. In the British Army, 60-pound packs were not rare. And those muskets, if any of you know, my friend Mary here in the Fife section has fired those 18th century muskets, but they're quite heavy. The rest of you haven't. They're really quite heavy. So you'd have this heavy musket with a big bayonet, and sometimes on the march you might have a 60-pound pack. So marching that fast was plenty fast enough. One of the big innovations in the early 19th century that Napoleon made, that his French army started to march much faster, and the French tempo was much brisker, and the French military music from this period is very bright and lively and moves right along. That was a new innovation. Like all these stories, it gets more complicated the more you get into it, but that's a good start on it. So that takes us pretty much into early America, and we're never going to get to anything else if I don't move up through the 19th century. In the 19th century, the early part of the 19th century, we do have massive immigration to the United States, and that leads to the big westward expansion. By westward, I mean Ohio, things like that. In a really agrarian society, you want to have a lot of land around you. The early New England towns, as you may know, were all organized around the village green. There would be common land where everyone could graze his animals, mostly cows. And on the village green, there would be a congregational church. You couldn't have, in the 17th century, you couldn't incorporate a town in New England if you didn't have a congregational church, and that would almost always be located on the village green. Why not? And then the farms would radiate around from there. The first people there would have houses, and their farmland would go out from that, right from the village green. So you can see this leads to lots and lots of very small towns. And so they're constantly moving. Every generation wants to move westward, mostly, and start a new town. Because if you want to be close to the center of things, you have to walk through everybody else's fields to get there. So New England towns tended to be very small. This changes later on. So during the early 1800s, people are moving westward a lot. And of course, up through, from Massachusetts, up to what they call the Hampshire Grants, up into Maine, because even Massachusetts seemed pretty prohibitive, because all the relatively good land was used up pretty rapidly. So people are moving a lot, and the country is growing geographically all the time. The big problem in the government, in our early United States government, the never-ending problem that comes up is the problem of slavery. And they tried all sorts of things to get around it. There's the Compromise of 1820, the Missouri Compromise, and the Wilmot Proviso, all sorts of ways to try to balance things out, because the country was about to blow up at any moment. There were always people, but political regions, this of course is it's become recently more controversial again. There are always people from the northern states who are trying to eliminate slavery. There are some people from the south trying to eliminate slavery. And there's at the same time this desire to try to keep the country together. And it never worked. They tried all sorts of things, balancing. We have one new slave state with one new free state, so-called. This led to all the slaughters in the Kansas, Missouri area, just for the main example of that. So ultimately, we had the Civil War. The Civil War, for our purposes, and the main thing for us to talk about with fifes and drums, this is the high point of fife and drum activity in the United States. President Lincoln called out huge numbers of people from the state militias. So it was not a professional army. The United States professional army was very, very small. And so what he called up were the state militias, and each state was required to enlist more people, which meant that in that war, people from every state and every economic class were presented more or less equally. If you were wealthy, you could buy your way out of the draft. But largely, there were people from most walks of life in the United States, and from every state. You read about these battles in Maryland or Virginia, and you find a Michigan regiment or a Wisconsin regiment is acting so courageously. It's all big hero of, one of the big heroes of the Battle of Gettysburg is from Maine. So the whole country is really affected by the Civil War. And again, they needed one fifer and drummer in every company, just like the old days. And they trained thousands and thousands of boys to be fifers and drummers. Yes.
Sorry.
And so after the war, there were all these people who played pipes and drums, and many, many people were in service. And this was a big part of their lives. You live in one of these farming towns. My father, in the 20th century, except for World War II, he hardly ever moved more than 10 miles from where he was born, most days of his life. Every once in a while he did do a trip, but that was such a big deal, once a year maybe. But he lived almost all of his life within 10 miles, and historians say that in medieval times, less than 5% of the population ever moved during their lifetimes more than 20 miles from where they were born. And that's being pretty generous about it. That's pretty accurate statistics, as close as we can tell. So all of a sudden during the Civil War, people are going all over the country, meeting people from all over the country. It's a huge part of the United States story. And this is the high point where fifes and drums are used, and this is why I think we've had fifes and drums ever since. We're going to play you a couple of the most famous songs. We call the tunes we play tunes. The tune is the melody of something. A song is something that you sing. We don't play songs because no one has ever thanked me for singing it. But we play the tunes. But we're going to play two of the most famous, and the one most famous. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about it. I know this is a little bit of a digression, but I like a program like this to have some historical content too. We could just show up and play a bunch of tunes for you. But I think this is important. And it seems to me that people are less aware of it. When I was a little boy, our music class in 2nd and 3rd and 4th grade would consist of our music teacher, Mr. DiStefano, pushing his piano from classroom to classroom. And the older people, I'm sure, remember that, but probably a lot of younger people, in my experience, didn't have this experience. But Mr. DiStefano would push his piano from classroom to classroom, and once or twice a week we would sing largely patriotic songs. My favorite was the Old English ballad Barbara Allen. That was my favorite. But we largely sing these patriotic songs. And they were not done. The point I want to make about this in the Civil War and how this accounts for having fife and drum corps 150 years after anybody ever used them for anything is because this was really important. You would sing those patriotic songs and you would not sing them ironically. And you would not be laughing at the whole thing. You were there and you were supposed to be serious. And when I was a little boy, I started first grade in 1960, almost all of our parents had been in World War II. And they thought that was a pretty serious thing. It wasn't something they were going to make fun of. Oh, the politicians are crooked. Oh, the country's a bunch of evil people. Yeah, you didn't really say that to guys. My father spent 4 years getting shot at by German people, and they finally got him. You know, that wasn't a joke. So there was this sense of patriotism that I think has largely disappeared. And the continuation of the fifes and drums for people. When I was little, I didn't know. I was just playing the drums and reading history books. But it was a big deal to the older people. Oh, you're in the fife and drum corps. That's American. That mattered to people. So I wanted to give you, and I hope you'll allow me to do this, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that mindset. The most famous song that was written during the war is, of course, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And so I want to explain a little bit about that to you. When I was little, I think a lot of people had those lyrics memorized and did that, but now I think very few people do. So, here I we'll play you the tune. I'm sure you'll recognize the tune. And some of the lyrics I think you will know. I just want to tell you a verse and a half of it. It begins with, "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." And this is really important. Going to church was a really big part of American life in the 19th century, and earlier too. But in the 19th century, kind of Protestant revivalism was really important and moved throughout the country. And people were not ironic or grudging about going to church. A lot of, not everyone, obviously, but going to church was a big deal. People tended to take it very seriously. Not everyone, I know that. But now, I think whenever we talk about history, people tend to say, yeah, Christianity, yeah, it's okay. You know, you can do that if you want, a little bit. You know, it's nothing I'd want to, you know, deal with myself. But yeah, and people make fun of it. You know, I just watched recently the great comedian Ricky Gervais. What a big laugh line he gets is he says some crazy thing that sounds implausible. Yeah, I read this dusty old book. Yeah, it's called the Bible. Ha ha ha! And it's a big joke. And the Bible wasn't so funny in the 19th century. People tended to take it seriously. So when you say, "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord," they mean that. They think, oh, there's something really important. This has ultimate meaning. The creation of the universe is affected by our United States. The Lord, He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. So God is angry. The universe is unbalanced. You know, you don't have to think about God in the sky, you know, the big guy with a beard that everybody laughs at. You know, that's not this concept. The concept is that the order of the universe is sacred and the universe is disordered. People are believing this. This exists. And the Lord is making wine. He's trampling the grapes to make the wine, and He's wrathful because the world is really unbalanced. There's something seriously wrong. God is angry. This is not a good feeling. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of His terrible swift sword. And if you've ever been within 50 yards or so of a lightning strike, it's pretty terrifying. And that's the idea. The power of the universe is so upset at American life that it's like lightning coming down. Something horrible and powerful is about to happen. And it's happening because of the universe. The universe is not happy with us. You know, God is this meaning of the whole universe, well, everything we can imagine. His truth is marching on, the truth of God. There are things that are absolutely right. So what are we getting to here? And what they're getting to, you see really in the last verse. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea. And you might wonder, what's lilies have to do with it? Of all the things to think about, Bethlehem and Christmas and Christ is born, why are you dealing with lilies? And the answer, of course, is in the Gospel of Matthew. And a very ancient Christian idea is that every human life has equal value. Everybody, you know, the Imago Dei, everybody is made in the image of God. Every human life is valuable. And the idea of slavery is the most obvious way to contradict that. To say, oh, this is property. Legally, this person's property. I own this person. Hey, go do this. Why? Because I own you. Go do that. And what these abolitionists are saying is that that exactly is an offense against God. And it can't be negotiated away. And the reference in the Gospel of Matthew is this. You can't buy people to write poetry like this. Consider the lilies of the field. This is from the King James Version. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet, not Solomon in all his glory is arrayed like one of these. Just a little flower, a wild flower. It's so beautiful, and you sense that it's beautiful. It's not the biggest thing in the world. Nobody's organized this. Nobody said, you are the flower, that's the ultimate flower. You're just something out there in the field. And yet that's important enough that God has to make it beautiful. And so if that's true, imagine about every human being. Every human being has this value. And this is what the abolitionists up north are talking about It's non-negotiable. You can't say, well, slavery, not too good, we'll do this or that. That particular party, which was not everybody in the North by any means, but that very powerful party was making this argument. And during the war, my point is that during the war, this song becomes so important and so widespread. And when people are marching off to die in Chickamauga and Cold Harbor and all these terrible places and dying horrible, horrible deaths, what's the justification for this? They have this song which instantly becomes so popular and so important. And they're saying, yes, we're doing something that's important. The whole universe is in favor of us winning this war to eliminate slavery. Now, there are two main parts of the war. One is to hold the Union together. That's one goal. Another is to eliminate slavery. Not everybody's on the same side with both of those. The politics are very complicated and dirty, and all that stuff is all true. But this tune, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, is really something that over 100 years later, when I'm a little boy, I'm still memorizing these words to sing in school. This had become a really important part of being in the United States. The United States was considered to have a mission, and part of that mission was connected to this sort of thing. So I just mentioned this to you. I know that's more of a lecture than you want, but all of these things that we play, they all have a cultural context. And to talk about the Civil War and not do anything about this Christian context, it doesn't seem right to me. So, when you hear this tune, this very, very famous tune, which we often just throw away or use as background music, that's the context for it. So we play that tune in our little group that we have, and then we go into another famous tune from that time, which we also used to sing when I was a little boy in school, when Johnny Comes Marching Home, which is a whole deal more lighthearted. It doesn't take much to be more lighthearted than the terrible swift sword of the Almighty. And most anything is more lighthearted than that. But you know, you may know that. You probably know the tune. I don't know if you know any of the words, but when Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. The men will cheer, the boys will shout, the ladies, they will all turn out. And that's exactly what young men want. You know, they want to have a party and everybody's cheering and all the pretty girls stop and give them credit for something. Guys like that. It's true. It's pathetic, but it's true. So, I'm going to play on this drum again, which I don't usually do for this piece, but I think it's so special to have this 200-year-old piece of history here. So, we'll play that. Thank you for indulging. You recognize those tunes, of course. Did you get the lyric? Did the lyrics go closer in your mind? I also want to play a couple of marches from the Civil War because they're fun and I like them. These marches are part of a different world than the earlier music that we've been playing. By the mid-19th century, there were a lot of German immigrants too. People are coming to the United States all over the place. The city of Hamburg instantly, interestingly, discovered that it was less expensive to, Hamburg, a big port city with lots of poor people right on the ocean there. And poor people, I beg your pardon? Right, Hanseatic ports, yeah. It was cheaper to solve that problem because nobody likes, it's just like we have the problem today. Nobody really likes the poor people starving on the streets. They make such a mess, we have to do something with them. So when they decided in the city of Hamburg it was cheaper to ship them to the United States than it was to have to feed them and put them in hospitals and all that's such a nuisance. So they just shipped them to the United States. So we had a large immigration of very poor German people. German people like instrumental music, and they even these poor people brought brass bands with them. Johannes Brahms was born in that milieu. His father was one of those brass players who just gigged around Hamburg really, really poorly. And there were lots of people in that situation. They really liked the brass instruments, so they brought these musical forms. And these couple of pieces we're going to play, I will not go into the music theory aspect of this, but these are in the forms of European marches with certain kinds of repeats and key changes in the middle, which isn't like traditional fife and drum music, which is old folk tunes. But these are very much like band music of that time period. These are quite Greek and lively, I hope. On a good day, they're lively. On a bad day, the fifers are disappointing. Trying not to have a bad day. There we go. All these drums ring more, but I'm trying to control the sound a little bit because we're just inside here. But it's kind of sad because we want to. All right, Portcato 4. These are from the Civil War, and interestingly, maybe these are authentic arrangements. These are exactly the fife parts, exactly the drum parts that were played in the Civil War. around this time, there was, this time meaning the music we just played, there was a huge Irish immigration also. There had been immigration from Ireland earlier, but at the time of the famine, that really increased a lot. And for us, it affected the music. A high percentage of music that has been played on pipes and drums since the Civil War has been Irish folk music, or music made by Irish immigrants that sounds a lot like, it's indistinguishable, you might say, from the Irish folk music. Ireland had been colonized by the British during the time of the Great Elizabeth in the 1500s, and had always maintained, good heavens, we're getting undressed, had been maintained its English control. It was against the law. Ireland, of course, was a very Catholic country. It's against the law for Catholics to do almost anything, to own land, to have political power. And so the people in Ireland got poorer and poorer as the English got richer and richer running the land. And by the mid-19th century, there were large farms in Ireland that made wheat and grains, and they were exported to England and to other places, owned by English landlords. And it was the native population of Ireland that was doing this farming. And they were living on potatoes, very largely. Potatoes have been discovered in the New World. Great, really cheap way, and don't take a lot of land to produce them. And so people were producing all these wheats and grains and exporting them, and they were mostly eating potatoes or some things around the coastline, things like collecting seaweed and selling seaweed. That was another kind of occupation. Very, very, very poor country. And in the mid-1840s, there was a blight on the potatoes, and the potatoes just would come out of the ground. They'd be black and mushy, and you couldn't eat them, and they were worthless. And so, not that we have anything wrong with England, but they said, well, you'll have to keep exporting all the wheat and grain to England, and you can starve. And so about between 1845 and 1852, about 1 million Irish people starved to death in Ireland. Population of Ireland at that time was about 8 million. About 1 in 8 people starved to death. Very largely the children and newborns died very rapidly, of course, with no food. And another 1 million were forced into emigration. Usually when you would emigrate, these are the poorest people in Europe. You don't have money to get on a ship to the United States. So you would sign an agreement with the ship owner, and you would go to America, and then a railroad would buy you or something, and you would work for the railroad for several years, or some other job like that. But you didn't just get to America and say, land of the free, home of the brave, let's go. You got to America, and somebody had bought this contract, had paid for your transportation, and then you had to work for them for quite a while. So being Irish at this time was not a healthy thing. The country never did reclaim its population, and even as late as after World War II, the population was still lower than it was in 1840. In the western counties, Mayo, County Clare, Donegal, were really depopulated. It's a really horrible story. The other side of it, I just want to mention in a sentence, just because I'm touching on these things. If you know about Irish immigration, I think it's worth touching on. We didn't have, all those things, what Ronald Reagan used to call our social safety net in various ways. That didn't exist in countries. So it is true, and it seems pretty reprehensible, that 1 million people died right across from the most modern industrialized nation on the planet at that time. That seems pretty bad to me. But there was no government programs in place. We didn't have government agencies that said, you're starving? That's our job. We better make sure you don't. That's something that's been an innovation since then. There are various ways to look at that. The little datum that people like to quote about this, which is true, is that at the time of the famine, this was publicized. This was not a secret. 1 million people were starving to death, and it was known. You all remember, this will seem like a little shift, the Oklahoma territory, the Trail of Tears, the Indians moving across there, the Choctaws, who were some of the victims of that forced immigration of Native American tribes, raised money. Now, of course, in those days, if you got $1 a day for working, you were doing really, really well. You'd work for 50 cents a day in the 1840s. The Choctaw Nation raised $710 and sent it to Ireland to try to provide food for them. The English government couldn't find its way to do that, or the English church. That was too much for them to do. But the Choctaws at least made their contribution. And it's all complicated, and it's all, I mean, this is the kinds of things that you can study for years, and it gets more interesting the more you study it. But nevertheless, that's a start. I'm hoping by mentioning some of this historical stuff, somebody might say, oh, I didn't know history was that interesting. Maybe I'll think about it. Because I love history. Okay, so we're going to play a couple of these Irish tunes that came to America around this time. These are 2 Irish jigs. Everybody's heard, I think, of an Irish jig. Here are a couple of them. Played in a tempo in a way that you can march to them. One's called Sergeant O'Leary, the other is called Rory O'Moore. So here we go. Mike, if you would allow me, I know we're going on here, but I'd like to do one more little educational thing and play one more little piece of music. I hope everybody doesn't get up in the middle of that to leave, but if you do, it won't be the first time. I'd like to show you a little bit about how, if not how a drum works, at least how a drummer works, because people often ask me about that. They find it a little bit interesting. Of course, until pretty recently, even at the time of the Civil War, the musical notation for drums was really primitive. There are just all these different kinds of notations people try to come up with. They're mostly impossible to read, because drummers were not really considered musicians and not considered part of the musical world. So people would be really well-known drummers, really successful drummers. There were, for instance, it wasn't until the probably Berlioz in the 1830s that there were ever drum parts for a drum band resembling this at all in a symphony orchestra. They just weren't. They were timpani parts and so forth. But you just didn't, that just wasn't part of it. We were called the field music. That's why our group is called the Connecticut Valley Field Music. And what this would have meant to musicians in the day was that you're the field music, you're not the musicians. So how did drummers learn, and what did you play? And I want to show you that. I think I can show you that very briefly, but I think it's interesting. You learn by having these patterns. As they said when they were talking earlier about the United States Association of Rudimental Drummers, this is a term that we use because drummers learn rudiments. You know, a rudiment is a basic element of any art. And drummers learn these, what we call rudiments, the little patterns. And I'll show you just a few, briefly get the idea. The basic thing we do is to play what's called a drum roll. I've given thousands of drum lessons at this point over the whole course of the last 15 years, and teaching somebody to play a drum. If they get to play a drum roll, then you're in business, you can teach them the rest of the stuff. If they don't get the drum roll, you ask them, do you really like the fife? Maybe the trumpet is more. But learning to do a drum roll is not easy, and I'm happy to say that there are quite a few people here who I've taught to do their drum rolls, so I'm pleased at that. A drum roll works like this, in this kind of traditional thing. This goes back several hundred years, probably in the 1300s or so, this idea got started. You play 2 strokes with each hand. You play left, left, and then you get better at it. So you can see all during that stuff that I've been playing, there are lots of little, that little figure, which comes up all the time, is this. 7 strokes, but you just put it in there. And another thing that became popular several hundred years ago, what was called a coup de charge in French, we call a flamme. You play 2 strokes almost at the same time, it's a kind of accent. And you don't emphasize this so much, they sound like this. If you play 2 strokes, see if I play singles, you hear, you play the flames, it just decorates it a little bit. If you play a rough, you play that, a lot of these are what we call onomatopes, the word sounds like the thing it describes. If you roll the R, you get a rough, rough, that's 2 little strokes. So you can play, and drummers will do, you just play, here's a bunch of 8 notes. We'll put 1 decorative note, we'll make it flames. We'll put 2 decorative notes and make them roughs. So you memorize those patterns, and drummers, we will recite whole patterns. My cousin, who's here, called me up yesterday about a drum beat that I wrote where the notation wasn't too clear, and we're talking about just listing off these patterns, and you put them together, and that makes a rhythmic phrase. Each of these patterns also has places where they fall within a phrase, and they will never fall anyplace else. And folk music is a lot like this, because I know Pastor Brian does that. Right? You have certain figures that will always occur at the end of a phrase, or at the beginning of a phrase, and so forth. So that's how the drumming works. By the time of the Civil War, our best book from the Civil War has got about 40 different patterns like this that a drummer would learn. Flama cues, and flama diddles, ratama cue, kind of thing. So there are about 40 of those that were in use by the time of the Civil War. And different national cultures have different ones. You play the Swiss style, the French style, the American style. They have different of these features that they emphasize, but they all do the drum roll. So we're going to play one more piece. I wanted to emphasize the historical part of the fife and drum corps today, and I think we've done that. Since World War II, especially, the drum corps that are remaining, there are many fewer drum corps. In the 1930s, Connecticut had about 130 drum corps that belonged to our association. We had a competitive association, Connecticut Fifers and Drummers Association, which sadly no longer exists. And in the 30s, there were about 130 different groups. I can tell you the name of every snare drum champion since World War II. I'll rattle off their names to you. This is very important to us. We know all that stuff. And it's gotten smaller and smaller for various reasons. And now there aren't too many left. But the corps that we have, something that's happened is that we tend to emphasize the individuality of the groups more. I write a lot of music for our group, and I have for other groups. And sometimes you make arrangements of other folk music, sometimes you write your own thing. And each group tries to have its own identity and writes music in a particular style that they like. We're going to play just one of our pieces for you because you've been very charitable to me so far. And this is a piece I wrote for us over 30 years ago now. And it consists of two Appalachian fiddle tunes. One is called Angeline and the other is called Old Joe Clark. And I'm saying this, and then they're figuring out what tune we're going to play. We have a famous joke in our group. We did a concert many years. We play a lot of Irish music, and many years ago, one of the first concerts like this we gave, Jennifer was here for that moment, and I gave this long speech about the potato famine and all that kind of stuff. And then I tapped off the tune. We're going to start the tune, and the five people say, "Which Irish tune are we playing?" Well, I try not to do that again. So this has two Appalachian folk tunes, one called Angeline, the other called Joe Clark, and then there's a spiritual at the end. There's a man going around taking names. And when we have more fifers, we play it in multiple harmony parts, but we're not going to do that right now. So we'll play that one for you, and that will conclude our program. Thank you very much. Before we play, I want to introduce the places. This is Caitlin. She's very sweet. This is Jennifer, who grew up in the Marquis of Granby. And is one of the most solid and best friends that anyone ever had. I'm happy that she's mine. And this is Mary, who comes all the way down from Massachusetts. So we'll play this Angeline piece for you, if we can. Here.
we're from Stony Creek, Connecticut.
Oh, you are? Well,
Yeah.
the famous Stony Creek Drum Corps, organized in 1887, I think, 86, around there. Very, very famous drum corps. What I say, Jennifer has heard me say, if you don't like the Stony Creek Drum Corps, you don't like fife and drum corps. It's a great drum corps. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
came
so-
from pretty different places to meet here, so.
Oh, just to hear,
Just-
oh!
From Hudson, New
I wish
York.
I'd done a better job. Thank you very much.
They came from Hudson, New York, and I came
Oh.
from New Britain.
Oh, my. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very, very much.
And we grew up with the Stony Creek Drum Corps, all those years, so.
And still alive to tell the tale. That's
Oh,
true.
amazing.
Good. Thank you.
So are you?
Yeah.
Uh,
Go ahead. No, you. How many members are in the Connecticut Valley Field group?
Fewer than there were 20 years ago. I just said, we only have, we have about a dozen people now. Yeah, it's really hard to get, we have lots of drummers. We've got 3 or 4 drummers here that play with, but the junior drum corps.
Applications for fifers.
Yes, that's right. Anybody likes woodwind instruments, boy, would we love to see you. The junior drum corps, when I was little, I grew up in East Hampton, and from that point, going down the Connecticut River, there were drum corps in every town. Drum corps in Ravens-Seger, drum corps in Cromwell, drum corps in Middletown, on the other side of the river, in East Hampton and Moodus. Go down from Middletown, Durham, Chester, Deep River, Westbrook. Every town had a corps. And now almost all those corps don't exist anymore. Young people do other things besides go out one weeknight, 52 weeks a year to be in the drum corps. And we try, I've been teaching, I've made a lot of my living, such as it is, teaching drumming and largely teaching the fife and drum corps, and it just isn't around, just very little of it now. There are fewer and fewer groups and smaller groups. So for a group like us trying to get fifers, it's hard. Sometimes if you play the flute or the clarinet or any woodwind, it's a pretty easy transition, but it's hard to get people to play. It's just a different thing, right? When I used to hang around with the guys who were in my father's generation. I love them. I love those guys. And guys, we go to work, maybe working class guys, they go to work. One night a week, you go out, you go to the bar, have a few drinks, play the fife and the drum, meet the guys. It'd be a night out, that's what you do. Now people tend to play video games and play on their computers and I mean, people do other things too. Or with the young people, there's a lot of highly organized, professionalized sports. You pay how much money to be an indoor soccer. You've got professional coaching staff and leagues and all that stuff. It's hard to compete with that because learning how to play a drum like that is not that easy. Maybe I just don't have any talent, it's extra hard for me, but it's not that easy. And it takes a lot of dedication and discipline to do it. These fifers have our whole repertory. We march many times. We can march a 2-mile parade and not repeat a single piece that we play. They have all that music memorized. It's not that easy to do. So you try to find people who love music, and of course, you don't get paid to do it. It's something that you like to do. It takes a lot of dedication, so it's a dwindling kind of music, even here in Connecticut.
About the Irish music that you were playing, is that like Irish music that's pretty current? Did Irish music come over during the potato famine years, or is this more recent Irish music that you're playing?
No, Irish immigration started, even in the 18th century, there was some Irish immigration, and that folk tradition is so strong. The peasant folk tradition in rural Ireland is so strong, although not everybody plays or anything, but it's a very strong tradition. So when people would come, you could bring a little whistle, they used to call them penny whistles because you could buy a whistle for a penny. Those days are gone. But you can make them yourself. Simple little instrument with what we call a thimble flute, where you end-blown flute, 6 holes in it. You can make one yourself if you have some skills. And you can just play all this folk music on it. So the Irish music came in. Those tunes we played, those are quite old tunes. Those tunes are at least a couple of 100 years old. I don't know exactly. And since the music's pretty much never written down and never played the same way, every group will have slightly different versions. Just like the Stony Creek Drum Corps plays some of the same tunes we play, but they're slightly different. But these are old traditional tunes. in the pre-electronic days, people did a lot of things to entertain themselves that we don't do anymore.
Jim, is there a difference in the drumsticks that you use?
Heavens, that's my specialty. I'm not rich enough to afford a whole collection of expensive drums. But my drumsticks are very, yes, these are bigger than what anybody would use for a modern thing. And I meant to bring some, I have some beautiful old ebony and rosewood sticks that were given to me when I was a kid. This is 17 inches long.
Right, they're long.
A Steve Gadd stick is a little under 16 inches. These are 17 inches long and almost twice as heavy. I've got sticks that are 18 and 19 inches long that were designed for the great big drums. And you play them not too fast, but you have a lot of fun working away at it. Yeah, so the sticks are quite different.
So it depends upon the weight of the wood or the length?
Yeah,
of
these are persimmon and some are rosewood. Yeah, the weight of the wood, you can, oh, don't ask me that question. You have different drums, and just the weight of the weight and the shape of the stick changes the tone on the drum. You can really hear it when you're right up there doing it. Mercifully, I won't do that for you right now. But yeah, we get all in. I've got about 120 pairs of drumsticks at home.
Oh, all right. Wow.
Just to bore you. Yes?
During the Civil War, when the drummer boys were directing the troops, what kind of sounds were they drumming at that point?
We played some, probably not quite as bright sounding a drum as this, but some of those beats we played were from the Civil War. But if you were marching, take 30 seconds. Here is an actual beat that was given just for that, but just for marching troops around, from a couple of pages called Quick Steps for Drum Corps. This is the right tempo and the right kind of, these are calfskin heads and catgut snares, and I'm a vegetarian, but the drums are my special area. And this is exactly a drum beat that would be used marching soldiers around during the Civil War. One of my favorites. Marvelous drummer. He was a drum corps drummer. He didn't do anything else with drums. He just played in the drum corps. He was a marvelous natural musician. And he used to take out these old Civil War books. And when I was a young man, I got to play with him for about 20 years. And we would take that, we play that stuff every time we got together, these authentic Civil War beats. And it was very important to me. So I'm so grateful that people are willing to listen to it. This is something that's been important to me. So. Got that? Well, thank you very much. Oh,
Thank you. A couple things. Do we happen to have any members of the Marquis of Granby here today?
We do.
Oh, good. Excellent. Very good.
They're also accepting applications for fighters.
And drummers.
Definitely.
In our East Granby history book on page 270, we do have a picture of an East Granby drum corps from around 1900. It doesn't say fife and drum corps, it just says drum corps, and there are about eight boys or guys in the picture. So I'm not sure if they had a fife or not, but
there were drum corps, just drums, but mostly there were fifes. In Moodus, our oldest active corps is from Moodus, Connecticut, and they incorporated in 1860. Now they go back much farther than that. And that group, they're very particular about always announcing themselves as the Moodus Drum and Fife Corps. Not fife and drum. Drum and fife corps. And when you listen to them, you clearly get that message.
Well, yeah, at one time we did have a drum corps in town. This was wonderful, Jim. Thank you, and thank you, performers.
Yes.